I suppose, prestigious, lucrative maybe, but certainly tremendous prestige, right? His own country believes that he is the finest person to lead Africa at the AU. Odinga intends to make the African Union a people-centered organization should he become its chairman. If this campaign succeeds, Odinga will then replace Musa Faki, who has served 2 4-year terms at the helm of the continental body. So let's try and make sense of his moves, his election moves, with David Matsanga, who is a political analyst and expert on diplomatic relations. David, welcome, and thanks for connecting to the National Pulse.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, the entire Africa, and good afternoon, the globe.
Thank you. Right. So let's start with this. Raila Odinga, should he stand for the AU chairman position?
Yes, why not? If you are looking for Pan-Africanism, you get it in Raila Odinga. If you are looking for a struggle for a better Africa, you get it in Raila Odinga. If you are looking for people who can speak and talk about Africa, who can change Africa, who can reject the Western Hemisphere influence on African Union, you get it from Raila Odinga. So for me, I don't want to lie to you. I go with him. I will support Raila Odinga, and I encourage African heads of state, this time to get our organization back, to capture back our organization that has been let down by Dr. Muhammad Faki.
What then are the qualities that he brings to the AU that so impresses you?
EU needs a people-centered organization. EU needs political education spread across Africa. EU needs safeguarding the borders that were there for Africa. It needs to solve problems. It needs to initiate projects that will bring peace on the continent. Raila has got those peace moves. He has got contacts. He has got the ability, the sense of, being independent-minded person who can say, no, enough is enough. At the moment, we don't have that in African Union. We are lost in a forest, yet we have everything that we need in Africa. We have gone for promises, promises, promises. Raila will change. Raila will make it an African center of attraction. If you look at the rest of the candidates, they have been supported by countries outside Africa. And that is why I, Dr. David Matsanga, as an expert and a man who has grown and seen conflicts on the African continent, I will support Raila Odinga.
Okay. For him to take up that position, how would that affect the work that he's been doing in Kenya?
I think he has to leave. He can't now be working for Kenya alone. He works for the whole Africa. If he takes up that position, under which he will succeed, with the help of other African leaders, with the help of other Africans whom we are going to contact. You see, the problem why Africa has got all these problems is that we go to these people, we beg them for help instead of begging our fellow African countries, opening the borders, having trade, having protocols signed. This would help Africa instead of us. We have enough resources in Africa.
All right, now I hear you, but again, the critics may say, hold it, we're talking about a person who's been presiding over his own country. We're talking about Kenya, which is as recently as a few months ago, there's been massive street protests in that country, and therefore many would associate him with, in fact, festering chaos in that nation. How does that?
Those street protests were spontaneous. They were not arranged by Raila Odinga. Street protests everywhere, even your place in South Africa where you are. There are younger men who are not very comfortable with you. The only problem that you have done is the state of governance. The structures of governance in South Africa prevents such street demonstrations like the ones in Kenya or the ones in Uganda or the ones in Nigeria, because you have a proportional representation system in South Africa that cushions some of these problems.
Okay, I hear you, but let's talk more about Raila Odinga than South Africa. So the point I want to make is but what about his role in Kenya so gives you the confidence when many others are skeptical based upon his track record in Kenya and not anywhere else?
I am not looking at Raila Odinga from the record of Kenya. I'm looking at Raila Odinga, whom I saw about 40 years ago in exile in Norway, in Sweden, in fighting for parties to return in Kenya. I'm looking at Raila Odinga, whose credentials for fighting for freedom that have sent him to jail like a Mandela.
But why would you not? But David, just to wrap up then, to end with, why would you not look at his track record in Kenya when that is the current track record versus what happened 40 years ago?
Because he's going to lead Africa. He's not leading Kenya. He's going to lead Africa, which is a Pan-African organization. We want at Africa, at the helm of African Union, sir, we want a person who thinks for Africa, who dreams for Africa, who talks Africa, who can bring salvation, who can open up borders, who can have one passport, who can have protocols of Malabo signed and endorsed, who can make Africa peaceful, remove conflicts.
Here's my last question to you. We're on to news now. Does an AU chairperson have that power? Because I would suggest they don't.
They do have the power, but the other one has not used them. He has sent the powers to France. You notice that all French-speaking countries in Africa have conflicts because Dr. Muhammad Faki has left everything and takes orders from France. We are having coups coming in French territories because of Dr. Muhammad Faki.
Okay.
People are not being condemned. You condemn Sudan and you leave Chad. What type of organizational structure are you doing?
All right, David, I'll tell you what, one thing about you, David, we leave it at that. Whenever we talk, you certainly move the national pulse. There's no question about that. Appreciate your time. We'll have this up as a podcast as well, ASAP. David Matsanga, political analyst, expert on diplomatic relations, reflecting on Raila Odinga's push to become the new African Union chairperson. Based upon the conversation we just had, are you convinced? I mean, you can't vote, but if you could, would you vote for him as the chair of the African Union? Let's get the news headlines now. Just gone 3:30. Here's Madupi.